So welcome to Planning Committee B. We won't have the usual preamble as we have no public participants in terms of mobile phones and toilets and the rest of it. So we'll move through kind of onto the first item, which is declarations of interests from members. Does anyone have any to report? Councillor Waters, please.
Technically non-prejudicial because I've called this item in, which does lead me to a question to Gareth. Was there a need for me to call this in, bearing in mind the original decision with occupancy levels was a committee decision? Would it have been right to assume that it would have been brought back to committee whether I'd called it in or not?
I'd say that under the constitution, you needed to call it in for it to come to committee. We wouldn't have automatically referred it.
Can't see another declaration of interest, so thank you. And the second item is the minutes from the previous meeting. Does anyone have any comments on those minutes? No, so we'll take those as being approved. There's no public participation today on item 3, so we'll move through to the single item that we have today, which is 4A 27 Bedale Avenue in Osbaldwick. So if you could take us through the presentation, Gareth, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a planning application that seeks a change of use of the existing small house in multiple occupation, which is in C4 use, to a large house in multiple occupation, which takes it out of that C4 use. This change is enabled by, there we go, a subdivision of, so at the moment there's you walk in that front door and there's an open plan lounge, dining room, kitchen, which is the communal area for the house. So the proposal is to put in a subdividing wall there and there, additional bedroom at ground floor level, and the residual dining room, lounge, kitchen, all at the back. It has existing parking to the front. The submitted drawings rather hopefully show 3 parking spaces, but we've considered there to be 2 spaces at the front that could be accessed independently. There's also a garage space to the rear, and street parking exists. The road along the side doesn't have any fronting residential properties. Cycle parking is provided to the rear of the garage, 7 space for 7 cycles. And on the papers, condition number 5 is proposed to restrict the change of use to no more than 7 occupants. So members will be aware that C4 allows occupation by up to 6. There is a update in front of you. There are some amendments. The drawing on the screen differs very, very slightly to the drawing in the papers in terms of the revised layout of the bins and the cycle store, just to ensure there's sufficient access to be able to access all of those cycle stands. There is also an additional recommended condition. The garage at the moment doesn't have a drop curb, so to make its occupancy by its use by a car lawful, we've required that a drop curb is constructed prior to bringing in the 7th bedroom, and there's an informative attached to that as well. So that's the end of. Oh, I've got photographs. So there's the front of the property. This is the side road that I was referring to, and then the parking area to the front. To the rear, that's the roof of the garage. And then the Google bird's eye view. Property here. Garage to the rear.
Thank you. Does anyone have any clarification? Oh, we might as well do clarifications and questions simultaneously. We know public speakers. Yeah, Councillor Belly.
Thanks, Chair. I was just wondering what the reason is for condition 5, the one restricting the number of occupants.
Because once it's an HMO outside the C4 use class, it doesn't have a ceiling of occupancy imposed by the use classes order. So C4 is limited to between 3 and 6 occupants, but potentially, obviously subject to licensing restrictions. If you didn't have a condition on, then potentially all those bedrooms could be double occupancy.
So why has the number of 7 been chosen as the maximum? Why is it necessary and reasonable to
I think that's
make
what
sure there can't be 8 occupants? Or
and that's
9?
what they applied for. And we've taken into account parking, cycle parking, and consider that condition to be reasonable in the circumstances. They've not, as far as I'm aware, they didn't seek any more than an occupancy of 7.
Councillor Orrell, and then come to
Thank you, Chair. Para 5.9 says the site visit was done during the day and the observations about parking were done during the day. I think we all know that parking during the day and parking in the evening is different. Is it standard to do an observation during the day rather than when the road is more, there are more cars parked there?
Site visits said to take place during the working day. Yes, we don't expect officers to do unaccompanied evening visits.
Okay.
Having said that, last night I did an unaccompanied evening visit, and my observation was that last night there was one car parked along the side road, and Bedale Avenue is you could count the number. That was maybe 6:30 last night. It was very lightly parked, so that I didn't notice. I've also done a sort of before work site visit as well, and there seem to be more cars parked earlier in the morning, but they're not, they're not parking surveys, they're observations on site visits.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Councillor Waters, please.
In terms of the conditions, Gareth, what compulsion would there actually be for anybody to use the garage, assuming that a drop curb was installed? And condition 6, again, what compulsion is there to have the waste bins stored out of sight to the rear of the property? Because I can assure you the bin is usually at the front.
It is enforceable. Condition 6 is enforceable. If it will be expedient to take action. I think my visits, the bin was behind the gate at the side, it wasn't in the rear garden, but it was behind the rear, the front wall of the dwelling. So, it was located around about there. The other question was, we can't force people to park in the parking spaces they're showing on the drawings. Unfortunately, we don't have that. I don't think we have that power. All we can do is make sure it's made available for parking. But if someone chooses to park on the road where there's lawful space where they're not causing an obstruction, then I don't think we don't have any powers to do that. All we can do is, what we can do is prevent it being used for other purposes, so it has to remain available for use.
Yeah.
Right, so I'm virtually going back to 2021 when the original change of use to HMO was approved. At the time, it was for 5 bedrooms, and the frontage, I made it quite clear that you could only independently move one vehicle when it was parked. For some bizarre reason at that meeting, it was accepted that there could be 3 parking spaces there. So I am pleased in a way that we've had confirmation from officers that there's only 2. But as the photo's up, I think it's worth noting that if there was another car parked in parallel to the 3 that's on the road, the blue car wouldn't be able to get out. That's why there's only ever 1 car parked there. It might look like there's quite a sweep of a vehicle crossover, but most of those aren't drop curbs on that corner. What you've got there as the current operation is 3 vehicles parked on the side road, all associated with the HMO, 1 on the driveway. There's usually 1 on the verge as well. Gareth's perfectly correct. You can't force anybody to use a parking space in the garage, nor can you force them to use 2 spaces that supposedly exist on the front. But what you can do as a planning committee, when you're presented with something like this, is not to make the situation on the road for the other residents any worse. We should be looking for 4 off-road car parking spaces with a 7-bedroomed HMO. There's plenty of case history on this. I'm sure some of you will recall the appeal decision at 41 Derrimore Drive, September 22. I don't think anybody will have seen the recent decision notice for HMO just around the corner. But if I can, Chair, I'd like to read it out in full, because it's all about consistency being applied by the local authority. And I'll read this. Different planning officer. It is not considered that the proposal provides the level and standard of vehicle parking that is required for a HMO containing 7 bedrooms. The vehicle parking requirements of the unrelated occupants of the dwelling are greater than those of a single family household, and sufficient details have not been provided to demonstrate that the proposed parking will be able to accommodate 4 off-street parking spaces with room for access and maintenance, or space for vehicles to turn or manoeuvre the existing vehicle. The existing vehicle crossing is not sufficient to provide independent access for each space. The proposed arrangement could therefore compromise highway safety by causing unsafe vehicle movements and on-street parking in an unsuitable location, also inconveniencing local residents and potentially harming visual amenity by promoting parking on nearby verges. And I'm sure the planning officer and legal are going to say this relates to an entirely different situation, but it doesn't. We must be consistent in these decisions, otherwise that recent refusal will certainly be taken to an appeal.
What I will say is
struggling for that being a question, I'd just say, do you agree, Gareth?
no. Every case is determined on its individual merits. We do discuss cases in the office before decisions are made. There are material differences between the two cases. The Tranby Avenue one that Councillor Waters mentioned, for example, the communal areas at 44 Tranby Avenue are smaller than we have here at Bedale, and it was also noted that 3 of the bedrooms didn't meet HMO minimum standards. So whilst we don't have any under the Planning Act, we don't have any minimum standards for HMO bedrooms. We did take that into account, and therefore the likelihood that the communal areas might be more used at Tranby, and therefore there was that intensification of use of the communal area. Tranby Avenue, there was also inadequate cycle storage. Wasn't demonstrated that they could provide the cycle storage required, and it wasn't demonstrated that they could provide independent accessible parking within the site. Tranby Avenue is also a bus route. It is more heavily parked than Bedale Avenue on our site visits, so we took that into account in terms of whether there was the opportunity for on-street parking that wouldn't affect residential amenities. So there are differences, and that's what's led to one of the schemes being refused and the one in front of you for Bedale Avenue being recommended for approval.
Does anyone have any, Councillor Baxter, to you for a question?
I don't mean to be pedantic, but I found a photo online where there's 3 vehicles on there, including a van. So there definitely is room for 3 vehicles, including like a decent sized van. But I don't know whether it is still worth having, you know, I can't really tell from the image whether those 2 can get out from the other one, but I think it's just worth pointing out that you can get 3 cars on there.
We when going back to my memory here, when the application was considered for the original change of use in 2021, the committee report does refer to 3 on the frontage, but says it'd probably be difficult for them to be independently accessed. So, you know, you didn't have to find someone to move their car before you could move your car. So I think during the meeting, we fell back on the fact that probably more comfortably occupied 2 than 3 because of that need to be able to get them in and out. But yeah, you could park 3, that's undeniable, but whether they would then be usable independently is probably the mattering point.
Councillor Waters, question, please.
Not being able to independently move them or have practical access to them, the vehicles, is a justifiable reason for refusal that was backed up by Inspector Cross's decision on 41 Derrimore Drive, which was issued on the 15th of September 2022. He also stated at the time, or referred to at the time, the absence of any swept path analysis showing that you could independently move vehicles on and off the parking spaces that were designated. And I would suggest you would need the same swept path analysis to show whether you could use the garage, even if a curb was dropped. If you look at the parking on there now, those 3 vehicles, which I would bet good money are all associated with this HMO currently, one of them would prevent safe access and egress from the garage. So what happens if you've got to leave the space to access the garage parking space? Do those vehicles park closer to the corners? You know, if you look on that photo, there's not one other car parked on the street. You know, we've a duty not to make the situation any worse than it is.
Yeah. Any other questions? Councillor Bassey.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got some questions about communal space and minimum standards for HMOs to make sure I've properly understood this. Are there limits on the amount of space given to multiple occupants in an HMO when you've got 7 people sharing 1 kitchen or 1 utility room, or 4 people sharing a toilet that you can only access by going through the lounge and the kitchen and the utility room? Just want to get my head round whether there are guidelines about what is considered acceptable from the point of view of people who occupy such a space. 7 people in a family living in a home will share the cupboards and the fridge and everything else and get by. 7 independent people are going to maybe want to have their own space Is there a minimum space that people have?
We don't have minimum spaces. There are no supplementary planning documents, for example, that try and that impose minimum room sizes. Licensing requirements do. So on page 16, 17, there's comments from highway standards. And that says that all the rooms are over the minimum national size. They said the current size of the living room is 54 square meters, and therefore even if part of it removed to create the new bedroom, there would still be sufficient space. The property has adequate bathroom provision, and the provision for cooking facilities is the same for either 6 or 7 occupants. So on the basis we don't have any separate planning standards, I don't think there's any grounds for us to say, as a planning authority, to say that we think the the room sizes are too small, or there's not enough communal space. It's a consideration, but in the balance with the licensing comments there, I don't think there's any grounds for us to refuse on that basis.
So there's nothing, make sure I've understood you, there's nothing on space, access to facilities like bathrooms and toilets. There's no minimum in a house of 7 people, everyone should have at least 3 square meters of space in a communal area. There's nothing like that.
No, there absolutely is what I just said, but it's not under the Planning Act. It's under the licensing regulations. So they wouldn't get a license for bedrooms which are too small, communal spaces that are too small, inadequate number of bathrooms would mean that the property couldn't be licensed for a certain number. For example, it might be a 6-bedroom house. I'm plucking this from the air, so don't quote me on these things. It might be a 6-bedroom house with only 1 bathroom, and that might mean that they can't occupy for 6 residents because there isn't enough bathroom space, for example. But in this property, under the licensing regime, there is sufficient bathroom space, cooking facilities, and the bedroom sizes are sufficient for 7 occupants.
Thank you. I understand what you said and I accept what you said. I think going forwards, since these come up with regularity, it would actually be helpful to know what that licensing guidance is. In the future, I would certainly feel comfortable if I had some understanding of what those minimum standards were. So if it were possible to circulate such a thing, I don't know if everyone else would want it, but I'd certainly like to see it.
Yeah,
Thank
makes
you,
sense to me.
Chair.
I think we can take that way. Councillor Clark, I'll come back.
Thanks, Chair. I just had a question really about the cycle access, because the arrangements have changed from the front of the garage to the back. And I want to know really about whether previously in the old arrangement, where the cycles went through the front or the back, as they will do with the new arrangement, and how their access is to, well, off the property basically, because I couldn't really tell from the picture there whether there was a gap between the garage and the wall, or whether the cycles come down the side there, which obviously are obstructed by bins, the waste bins in that picture, as Councillor Watts pointed out.
So there is access down the side. As I said, there was a bin in the way, but the bin doesn't have to be in the way. And that you can access, as far as I can tell, you can access along the side and then through the gate. But I would imagine that the best thing to do would be to position the bin in a different location and take cycles down that way. But that was a route.
Councillor Waters, you got a question?
I would hazard a guess that the cycle stands haven't held anything other than cobwebs since they were first installed, but never mind. in relation to what councillor Bass has just said, I was just wanting to suggest, Chair, that when you do have a light agenda like this, it might be worth just having a separate briefing as an agenda item from licensing. Because there's so many HMO applications that come up in front of this committee.
Does anyone have any further questions? In which case, look to move forward into discussion and voting on the officer recommendation. If anyone would like to start us off with discussion. Yeah, councillor Fenton, please.
I think looking at the paragraph 6.1, the conclusion in the report, I think I would agree that moving from 6 to 7 bedrooms wouldn't have a significant impact on neighbouring residents. Obviously, the impact such as it is has already been realised, but I'm struggling to get my head around the impact in the reduction of communal space within the house, because basically it was there's a lounge area, a dining room area, and a sort of a kitchen. So there's a fair amount of communal space. So we're adding one more person and taking away a significant chunk of that communal space. There's a kitchen and dining room, but really, well, it says dining room / lounge. But I think looking at the size of it, I think you'd struggle to have people both eating and watching TV or whatever. So I do struggle to see how that is an appropriate. I struggle to see how that would not have a significant impact on the amenity of existing and future occupants, because I think it would have an impact. And I think if I were living there at present and, enjoying the facilities available, I think it would have a significant impact on my ability to, on my quality of life as an existing resident. So I hear what you're saying in terms of, well, it meets standards from a licensing perspective, but we have to consider things that are for the planning committee to consider, and I do struggle to agree with the conclusion in the report.
Can I come back for a question actually in that case? Did you say that it was 55? Which area was previously 55 square meters? Was that the entirety of the kitchen, lounge, diner, or just the lounge?
So as far as I'm
I don't know what that meant. The remaining area for the lounge was, but it's hard to.
we haven't done that. We haven't done that calculation because we didn't think it was relevant, given the comments from the licensing team.
Okay. Anyone else? Councillor Waters.
And of course, if people are looking for reasons to refuse, the real defendable reason for refusal is that of failure to provide sufficient off-road parking spaces. You should be looking, again, if you turn to paragraph 5.8, for 4 off-road car parking spaces associated with a 7-bedroomed HMO. Now, if Gareth had got the photograph up with the 3 cars parked on the road and 1 on the driveway, that's 4. Potentially, there could be 7. Stick another 3 down there and explain to people trying to access their own houses why they have all that difficulty. Again, we shouldn't be making the situation any worse than what it is by increasing the occupancy levels of this property.
Yes, so I'll put my bit in. I think for the amenity space, it looks, can only cast my mind back to when I was in an 8-bed HMO, and I think it looks larger still than what we had, and I think it's a reasonable amount of space, particularly with what is quite a nice layout of the kitchen dining area, plus that space on top of it. So I'm okay with that. The parking, I can get where you come from. My only comment on it would be, if we were to approve it, would be the question of, I think the main issue comes from the layout of the wall at the front and the way that it's set out in the access. You look at the property to the south of it, and that's got much less walling along the front, and it easily gets 2 cars in with easy access. And I think the issue is that the wall prevents people from actually using it as parking space. So I think it'd be a case of conditioning that to, you know, make sure that they look at how they improve that arrangement before it would be acceptable, because at the moment you can't drive in with only one vehicle going in or out, which doesn't make it a workable space. But that wall's neither a particularly attractive architectural feature or useful for parking. So I think that would be my comment if we were to take it forward, is that arrangement for parking needs to be resolved for the layout of it. Yes. Councillor Melly.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, it says in the report, and you know, it says in every report that we ever get, that development should only be prevented or refused on highways grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety, or if the residual cumulative impact on the road network would be severe. And I totally take the point that was made earlier that the parking situation was looked at during the day when it never is severe, but we haven't actually got any evidence that it would be severe not during the day, kind of in the evenings, because that assessment hasn't been done. So we haven't got that evidence to base a refusal on. And I also agree that we need to make sure there is enough amenity for future residents. I think that's really the role of the planning committee, is to have some control on HMOs to make sure that it's not just packing in as many people as possible, just fitting in as many bedrooms as possible with nothing else. But actually, I think this layout, this plan has a lot more bathrooms than we usually see for HMOs of this size, a lot more kitchen space than we usually see for this size, and additional shared space like utility room and that sort of thing. It's actually you've got a lot more shared space than other applications that this committee has approved in the past, without a cap on the number of residents even. So I'm happy to approve it along with the officer recommendation.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Just in terms of parking, I was just going to remind members that back in November 2021, when we dealt with the original change of use, members then considered that 2 spaces on frontage were acceptable for that 6-bedroom, 5-bedroom, or 6-bedroom HMO. So it would be difficult to row back from that now, committee having made that decision and accepted the issue of the street parking that was available at the side. So in this case, we've got the 2 on the front, we've got the garage, and then we've got the space potentially on the side road.
Thanks. Looking there. No one else have anything to add for discussion, or I guess at this point, would anyone like to second Councillor Melly's proposal to move it forward? Councillor Baxter.
Yeah, I'd just like to second Councillor Melly's proposal. I think yeah, there's actually quite a lot of bathrooms for that space. You know, that's the requirements that you need for sort of 10 bedrooms, and this will only be sort of 7. So I think there's a decent amount of amenity space there.
Okay, thank you. Did anyone have anything to add before? Yeah, Councillor Bassey, please.
Just want to ask one quick last question. Reference is made in this to the garden. The building doesn't actually have a garden, it has a yard, doesn't it? Were discussions ever taken place about using that yard to park a car in? I just want to understand what's happened during this process, because when you show us the picture, all we see is some more hard standing at the back.
We wouldn't have had any discussions on this application because the thought process was that what was proposed was sufficient. We did have a discussion about the layouts because as you saw on those drawings, the architect has drawn 3 spaces, and we made the decision that there wasn't 3 spaces, so that they had to provide that third in the garage. But we haven't considered or suggested that they use parts of the rear amenity space as a further parking space. We don't
Again,
think
thank
we don't
you.
think it's necessary.
Yeah.
And my recollection is that it was hard surfaced when we originally dealt with the first change of use, but I might be wrong.
Thank you. Again, going forward, Chair, I think this is the kind of thing that would be helpful to us to understand, or certainly helpful to me to understand what principles inform discussions at that stage, because we can see there's a lot of cars. We all agree the situation. We also see that there's some extra hard standing there. I'd like to understand why and whether such use of other areas of the surface area around the property might be used as part of developing an application. I recognise what you're saying is that we're past that stage. We're looking at what we've got in front of us. But I think going forwards, it would be helpful to get a sense of how that works. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I can't see anything else, so we'll move forward to vote on officer recommendation. If you can take us through that, please, Gareth. I think it's just as it's laid out.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so that's the recommendation is as with pages 20 and 21 of the agenda, with the addition of the recommended condition 7 and the associated informative, and then there's a slight consequential change to condition 2, because we're now looking at revision B instead of revision A for the approved drawings.
Thank you. Okay, in that case, can I see all those who are in favour voting for the officer recommendation as proposed there? And all those who are against? Okay, thank you. In that case, the application is approved, and that's final application that we have today. So that is the end of the meeting. Okay, thank you very much.